Hello, 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 and welcome, guys, to GTS Perspectives this Friday. I am your host, Master Great Jess, and with me, a man who needs no introduction, Chessy Monkey, aka Simon Lam, or should be the other way around. Simon Lam, aka Chessy Monkey. How are you, man?
It's probably easier just Simon. Hi, I'm very good, thank you.
We hope that you guys are doing well. Let us know how everything sounds regarding music and all of that. Hopefully everything is okay in levels. Today's show is going to be pretty cool. I've been wanting to talk to Simon for a while. I have messaged him in the past, but we finally were able to set up a whole interview. And honestly, I can't wait to talk a little bit about your style, Simon. But before that, how are you, man? What have you been up to lately?
I've been playing a lot of video games lately, actually, to be honest. People who know me know that I've been working on a Zoc lately. It's a really fun project. It's a recreation of illustration from a Japanese artist. It's getting close. It's getting to a point that I can do the final prime and then start the painting process. I'm looking forward to have it finished.
Wow. Okay, cool. And you're doing all of this while also juggling video games. What video games have you been playing?
The Fallout 76. I waited 3 years to play that game.
Yeah, I'm glad. We were talking about that a couple weeks ago, and I'm glad you're playing it now because I remember the launch was completely terrible. And
oh yeah,
they fixed it though. They fixed some things.
They most certainly did. Yeah, they fixed that game.
Yeah,
it's playable now.
Guys, remember that today's show is sponsored by USA Gundam Store. I remember to use code TALK10 on your next purchase through them to save 10%. But with that said, we're gonna start off things with whatever we have on the next slide, which is your one of your first kits that you worked on, which is the PG Zaku here.
Oh,
yeah. So let's start things off here with a little throwback.
Okay, so the Zaku was basically, this is where it started. To give you a bit of background, I actually stopped building. I used to build a lot when I was a kid in my teens, and then ever since I came to Canada, I stopped building for a good 20-25 years. And the PG Zaku is where I picked up my airbrushes again.
Mm-hmm.
So this is my probably my first build in Canada, I guess. Because it was the first one, so I was trying to think, so just to get myself familiar with the process again. So nothing was really changed, nothing was mod. It's just a practice project for me to do weathering, but it turns out quite well. Now this kit though, I bought this from the very first launch of the original PG Zaku.
Wow.
So it has been with me for over 20 some odd years. It actually comes in a pair. I bought the RX-78 and the Zaku at the same time. And I've been sitting on my bed for 20 some odd years before I picked it up again.
So you got them when they first released, huh?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Now the way you can tell, I can tell you a little something what happened back then. The first print of the PG Zaku, the instruction actually have the wrong picture on it. Instead of showing the Zaku, the high mobility Zaku with more boosters, they actually showed the regular Zaku's 5 in the instruction manual.
Yeah.
So that was a little hiccup that they did, and they fixed it afterwards. So only the first batch has that wrong instructions.
So you have a relic with you then, basically.
Pretty much.
Basically,
I was lucky that the plastic didn't crumble on me when I built it.
Wow. Well, this is really cool. I know that the Zaku, the PG Zaku. Honestly, I haven't seen a lot of them, the Char's Zaku at all. I know you can find them, but they are kind of expensive sometimes whenever you do find them because there aren't a lot. Or at least I haven't seen them.
Most people choose not to build them. They just collect them because they're literally, the first generation PG is nothing really more than a statue because you can't really post anything with those things. Yeah.
Yeah. So even now that, we're going to one of the things, well, mainly the kit that brought you back into building. And you mentioned that this is the first one you built here in Canada. Had you built any beforehand? Like, what's up with that?
Well, I grew up with the Gundam culture basically. Like I grew up when I was in the 70s, so most kids like me in Hong Kong back then all loved Gundam. So we all built models, whether it's tank, cars, Gundam, we did them all. But then ever since I came to Canada, one of the problem is like there was no tools available back then. So like for us, instead of just snap fitting, they kind of want to do more, try to paint it properly, do all the seam lines. Without being able to do that, so I basically just dropped it and forget about it until I think it was 2016. I went to Japan,
Okay.
and I bought I found one of the old school airbrush that I grew up as a kid. It was a Tamiya single action. It's one of those plastic one that
Uh,
comes with electric pump.
hmm
I brought it back and I started building again since.
Wow. Okay, so going to Japan kind of revitalized that in you, especially after seeing that
Yep.
airbrush. And one of the main things that you actually talked about right now is the tools and how hard they were to get back then. What do you think of the scene now here in Canada specifically, with tools and all the stuff that we can get? Do you think it's still difficult? Do you think we're going in the right direction, or do you wish that you could see more tools that the Asian market has a hold of?
It's a different world now. Like you can get literally anything you want. Like, there's no different building here than as if you're building in Japan. I know there is some stuff you still can get here, but then for the most part, even if you can't get it here, you can always have it shipped from Japan directly. You don't have that option 20 years back then. No, mind you, Hobby Link Japan has been around for that long.
Hmm
It's just that the shipping was pretty bloody expensive back then. And then as a school kid at the time, I really can't afford to do all those kind of things.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, at least now we have an easier time getting a hold of these tools. But
Oh,
moving on to, because like you said, this was a little test project. We see a little bit of weathering around the feet and battle damage. And it seems like you were in some way maybe already, like, had you done weathering before this kit, or is this the first time that you tried it?
oh, no, no, for sure. What happened is we started off doing military models.
Hmm
So we did tanks before and battleships. So weathering was something that we already knew how to do. That's the only way we know how to do back then, pretty much.
hmm
So we're no stranger to that, but it's just that we haven't done it for 20 years. So I guess you kind of have to get the feel for it again.
hmm Okay. Well, I mean, it's just I love talking to modelers who come from the army scene. For example, like Kev Models, who originally began with military stuff and now is working with Gundam and Resin. But seeing you guys being able to move the techniques from there onto Gunpla, would you consider that to be an easy process or a little bit more difficult? Do you think that Gundam is a better medium or inferior?
Um, it came quite natural because it was actually the trend back in the 80s to use military style of weathering on a Gunpla. There was a lot of famous builders in Japan actually they really pushed this out and it worked really well. The only thing that we have to be careful is because of the scale was very different. Like when it comes to military, we typically deal with something like 145, but when something was blown up into 160 or 144, you kind of have to be careful and not to overdo something.
Hmm
Because ideally you're thinking that there's something about 18 meters tall. So it will weather differently than a tank that's about 3 meters tall, right? So
Yeah.
those are the different considerations, but the skill, I mean, the application itself, the technique itself is exactly the same. It's just that you have to think about why and how it would show up on a 20 meters tall robot.
Wow. Yeah. I have heard that because, like you said, it's the scale of things, right? And I've heard some more experienced modelers, not me, who have said that, especially when it comes to weathering, you have to be very careful, right? Because we're talking
Mhm.
about giant things as opposed to just, tracks on a tank. But with that said, like it really is cool to see how you came from there. Real quick, I do want to say hi to Kid Chaos, Noble Mecha. Thanks for gifting a tier 1 subscription over here on the community. Thank you so much and welcome, man. But with that, let's move on to the next one here because we're still on Char. So aside from the Zaku 2, now we have the big boy, the Sasabi, the Verka.
Right. So this is another practice project for myself, and this is what before I stopped, this is the most popular way of painting, which is the candy color at the time.
Hmm
Um, um, there was a time when five-star stores were really popular, and everybody has to do the Night of Gold, and the only way to do it back then, because there really wasn't a whole lot of metal paint that's good at the time.
hmm
So we choose to do a candy color instead. So candy color came from automobiles, basically. That's exactly how people would actually paint the car.
hmm
Now you have metal color that comes really reflective, really gives you a mirror finish just out of the box. We don't have that option back then. So this is a good flashback because the process for doing candy color is a lot more annoying than just using something that's sprayed and then it looks good as it is. Because technically, you're doing at least 10 to 15 coats of a gloss coat on top.
Wow.
And it's pretty painful.
Wow. 10 to 15, you said.
Well, because what happens is if you know anything about race cars or motorcycles, one of the big things for them is to get that perfect mirror glossy piano finish.
Yeah.
But then when there's decals itself has a certain height to it. So if you just paint a top coat on top, you will have a level difference between the decals and the plastic itself. So what we end up doing is to flood it with a lot of layers of top coat and then buff it back down so that the surface is perfectly smooth. So that's the same concept for candy coat coloring. So it takes a long time and a lot of patience to do.
Wow.
And you get that perfectly smooth finish at the end of the day. You can't describe that feeling when you get it done right.
I for sure can't, but it seems really wild to even think that people. So I've seen people buff things out, like clear plastic that comes with kits. They buff it out so it could be even clearer, right. You know, translucent. But I have honestly, like, it's been almost 2 years since I've been doing this whole GTS stuff and talking to people. I have never heard of putting on a bunch of gloss, right? Like, you know, the multiple coats, only to buff it down to get it nice and perfect with the decals. That is something that's foreign to me. I have never, ever heard of that. How difficult is the process, and did you ever run into any mishaps?
If you're doing a large surface, it's not as hard as you think. You just have to make sure you have enough coat to top coat so that you can, when you buff it down, you don't go all the way down to the decal itself.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to Gunpla, a lot of times you don't want that, because what happens is then it becomes too thick. So all your scribe lines are basically all level up. So it becomes really hard for you to do the scribe to do the panel lining afterwards. So typically, either people would do the panel lining before they do the top coat, or they would do less coat, but they would focus on the areas around the decal itself. So when it comes to buffing, they would only buff all the silver line around the decals, just enough that you don't see that line anymore, and they consider it done instead of going all out and do a full-size a top coat, a candy coat.
Wow, that is, again, that's super foreign to me, and it sounds scary to do, especially if you don't get it right. But
it's tedious.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you have to be very careful. It's a very, you know, tedious. Tedious is such a good word for it, I feel. When you were buffing, would you be using sanding sticks like around the 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 range, or how would you buff it out?
If you're doing the top coat, we suggest we start with a minimum at 2,000. You know, God hand right now goes all the way up to 10,000.
Yeah.
So if you start with 2,000, you have to be really careful, be gentle when you buff it. Typically, I would say start with a 4,000. It might take a bit more work, but then you're safer that you have less chance of over buffing.
Yeah.
Wow. Because what happens when it comes to decal, once you scratch it, is done. Now, the good thing, if you do military, if you scratch the decals, then you turn it into weathering. So one way or the other is going to work.
Yeah, you work with the mistake. Okay. Very nice. My question now here is, what are your thoughts on the Sasabi Verka? Have you built any more afterwards, or has this been the only one that you built?
That's the only one I built, and that's more than enough, to be honest.
Yeah.
The MG car, it's a masterpiece. It's a masterpiece of engineering. It's a pain in the butt to pose and to keep all the pieces on the on the build itself.
Yeah.
One of the problem, I think most people will have the problem, is the Sasabi has the problem of holding the cannon.
Yes.
In his hand. It's keep dropping because it just doesn't make sense. There's only a certain angle you can actually put there, because the sleeve is so big, it actually obstructs the cannon itself. So those are the kind of things I wish Bandai would have fought them over a little bit better, because it's not just this one. There's quite a number of builds that I've seen that has the same problem. But at the same time, it's just look at the engineering, the way it looks, the detail is just phenomenal compared to the stuff that I was doing when I was teens. And this is a whole different world.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that, because even today, I think the Sasabi Verka came out in 2013. That makes it 8 years old, and it's still held as one of the best kits ever in master grade form. So really cool. Candy Coat. So right now we've been talking about weathering, which was experimenting, but you brought that over from military, and now we're talking about Candy Coat, which again was experimenting with the Saucy Verka. But then next on, we see something completely different. We even see a little tag at the bottom, the GBWC 2017. And this Psycho Zaku, which you have here. Tell us a little bit about this, because this is a really big divergence from what we saw in these past two pictures. Like the style is way different.
Yeah, what happened here is, okay, so I've been building for about probably close to a year then. And then I was shopping for my birthday present. I was at a model shop, a local one.
Yeah.
And they were saying, hey, did you know there's GBWC in Canada? And I was like, really? There's the GBWC is actually in Canada? Turns out, yeah, 2017 was the first year that GBWC launched in Canada. And I thought, hey, maybe I should try it and put in something. But the problem then is because that year we only had about 3 months when they announced it and when you actually have to submit the piece. So everybody only has 3 months to work on. So in a sense, you can't really do something too complicated. So you have to really judge what can you get done in 3 months.
Yeah.
So it was really rushed. So I cannot do a lot of changes, a lot of modifications that I really wanted to do. But the idea with this one is that this is actually a high mobility Zaku from Johnny Raiden. So the way I like to build my model, I try to give it a background story because I like building Gundam because I like the animation itself. So when I try to build a model, I want to see if what I created might actually be possible in the animation itself. So I actually did quite a lot of research on Johnny Raiden and find out the time that he was missing in action. Does it really match into the status memory timeline? Would it be possible for him to get a hold of the nuclear weapon from GPO2?
Wow.
I did all that background research
yeah.
before I actually created this design.
Yeah.
So that part was fun actually. But the rushing to get it done was not. I was lucky enough. I was lucky enough to win the Canadian side. Didn't do really well in the World Championship, but for 3 months, I think I did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I mean, even just if I forget when Canada got their own GBWC, was it 2017 or was it 2016?
It was 2017. So
yeah, it was
the first year.
Exactly. So this was the first year for Canada, and to think so to put it into perspective for those that are watching, GBWC has been going on for a while in Japan, right? So these people know that next year they have a competition this size going on. So that gives them a year to prepare, or even 2 years if you want to skip one GBWC to really create a masterpiece. So when you put that into perspective, even if we talk about someone who's preparing for a year, that's 12 months. As opposed to someone who has just been told, hey, we have a GBWC here, 3 months, all you have. It really shows the ability that you have to really bring something to life, even if you didn't have enough time to really do all the modifications that you were expecting to do, which is completely understandable, right? Now, if I may, I want to ask, what exactly did you want to do to this kit aside from what we see here on screen? Like, what were those modifications that you didn't get a chance to really work on?
The proportion was untouched. So this basically the length of the limb, the waist, the hands are exactly it's original. So the only thing I really did is just adding details on top of what's already there. And the modification I did is just on the backpack itself. So it's taking those parts from GPO2 and slap it onto the back of a high mobility Zaku and try to make it all work together. If I had more time, I would have worked on the proportions as well, because that's something that if you're old school like me, back in my time, when you talk about modification on a model, it really isn't adding stuff to a model. Really is changing the proportion or making ways for it to be able to do those dynamic pose in the animation itself.
Yeah,
those were what we call modification back in my time. But then when it comes to 2017, I was like, wow, this is brand new to me.
Yeah.
And it's exciting too, because this is the first time I do so much modification, try to make it look cool. Yeah. And it worked out quite well at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, it works completely well, because even the base, which is I think is something we haven't even talked about, is you actually modified the action base here and gave it more detail, which is something that not a lot of people do. And I think even Derek has mentioned that if you really want to bring out a kit to look even better than it is to work on that base or that presentation of on where it stands. So what was the idea behind the base?
The base was a complete afterthought because I only had time to finish the Zago itself on time. But I don't know if you recall, they actually postponed the deadline that year for another month.
Wow.
So I was like, now I have another month and I have enough times, so I have to create a base for it. I couldn't do something crazy like a diorama and all that. So the only thing I could do is to take an action base and make it look nice. And if you actually look at the details on the base, 90% of those parts came from GPO2.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite amazing. Like that was done in 2017. The same GPO2 that I used back then. I'm still taking scrap parts from it.
Wow. It's still okay.
Somehow it lasts me 4 years.
Wow. Man, so you have your own graveyard then still of
pretty
parts.
much, yes.
Okay, nice.
Now I do.
This is pretty amazing, especially once you, like you said, you put the backstory to it, the research that you did to try to get it kinetically correct, and even just delving into the lore of Gundam and making it into your own, vision, in this case with the Johnny Zaku here. I think it looks great, man, and I'm so glad that you won.
Thank you.
It says the Red Rock 3 says that's why you can't just throw away parts willy-nilly. Yeah, you got to start creating your own graveyard. I'm pretty sure Simon will agree with you.
Never do that. Yeah, absolutely. Graveyard is super important.
Graveyard is important. I had one more thing here. So far we've only seen you work with, Zeonic suits. Is this a reference? Do you like Zeon suits more than you like the Federation side, or what is going on here?
I'm anti-Federation.
You're He's anti-Federation. Okay, there we go.
Yeah,
that's all I needed to know.
Most people from my generation are pro Zeon. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Especially if you have a military background, because just the design itself, a lot of the Zeon design came from the German army stuff. So you see a lot of resemblance there, and by default, you're more lean towards those type of design than the squarely boxy design, the sharp edges from the Federation side.
I like that. I like that perspective a lot more than just liking the bad guys because of the bad guys. Because obviously, like I said, I've talked to a lot of people, and a lot of people tend to like Zeonic designs over Federation. Then you get the odd one out who likes Federation more than the Zeon. But the fact that you even mentioned the correlation between the design language from German design in World War II over onto what would be mechas, or mechs in this case, makes a lot of sense, and I can definitely see that connection, especially since you came over from the military side. But regardless, awesome work on this. I love the piston work on the base. I love the color choice, because it's a very muted red without being extremely muted. I really like the color choice here. Yeah, so really works well.
Thank you so much.
But moving on, so now we're kind of moving away from what would be Gundam in this case, which is one of the reasons, or one of the things that I told you about when we first started planning out you coming on this show, was kind of going on to other things that aren't just Gundam. And here we have the Rex here, the Metal Gear Solid 5, and your work here. So you want to tell us a little bit about what you did here?
Well, after I started building model again, I kind of want to go back to my military background. So I figured, okay, I like sci-fi and I like weathering. How about find something that feels like military, it feels like a tank, but yet it's a sci-fi. And Metal Gear fits in the bill perfectly. At the same time, I was telling you before, I'm still trying to refresh my memories when it comes to building. So I try to give every single project a topic for me to practice on. And this one is on the camouflage and basically masking in general. So what happened is I took a lot of effort trying to find out the exact camouflage pattern that was in the video games, and try to recreate exactly that instead of just guessing or trying to create something similar. I try to actually 100% recreate the exact same pattern from the video games.
Wow.
Turns out it wasn't really possible because it was a texture mapping in the game, so it actually looks different in a lot. It depends on where it is in the game. On the scene, exactly. Yeah, but for the most part, I think I did a pretty accurate recreation of the original camouflage from the game.
Yeah. I was about to say, yeah, it looks very accurate, but before we even go into that, I just really want to applaud you and the fact that you know, ever since we started talking here, regarding your research that you do before you even go into a project, right? So for one, there's a whole aspect of experimenting with the different technique and learning it. And another is trying to stay true to the roots of whatever it is you're working on. Or even trying to be as accurate as it can be. So the fact that you went on there only to realize that the camo was a different texture in almost every scene really speaks to how passionate you are about your work and your skill level. Now, with that said, was it difficult to do the whole camouflage? How did you feel with that experiment? Did it get to what you really wanted it to get, or were there areas that you knew that you could still improve on?
It comes out almost exactly how I wanted it. Now, because typically, if you look at the camouflage itself, it's a very digital camouflage. There's a lot of straight lines. There's no curved lines and all that. So you end up using a lot of masking. But because it's straight lines, it's actually easier to do than curved lines. Because what happens is you can, if I remember correctly, this camouflage has 4 different layers plus the original gray tone from the robot itself.
Yeah.
So you're basically masking it once for one color, and then sometimes instead of removing everything and do the second mask, you go mask on top of what you already done to create the different layers. So a lot, when you see some of the areas are very small of a different tone, it actually comes from the bigger areas, but then another color was actually layered on top of it to create that small area. So when you do the pattern, you actually have to think about how you're going to mask this one layer at a time to create the final result that you want. That's a fun process for you. Like, you have to plan ahead before you do it. So it's not just like, oh, if I have a gray on one side, blue on one side, then I'm going to mask this area, just do the blue, and then mask this area, do just the gray. It's actually, you can do a much larger area of gray, and then you put the blue on top. But when you do that, you have to think about the transparency of the color too. So you don't want to use a very light color to go on top of the darker color. There's a chance for the color to come through. So that's what I'm saying, that you have to plan ahead before you actually do it.
Wow.
But when you do, a lot of times it comes out perfectly.
Well, and yeah, and this came out definitely perfect. I know that obviously everything can be improved on, but I have no quarrels with this. This is great. And one of my favorite things of this kit, looking it up close and looking at the details, are the little streaks that you have of rest going on. Now, before we move on with that, let me just thank Vandrel or Vanderly or Meg for hosting. Thank you so much. Hope you're doing well. I can see there. You are there. Good luck tomorrow on the IPMS, and great work on your T-Rex. Hope you're well. Oh, and thanks for donating 69 bits. The 69 number is such a random number that you guys chose. But anyway, yeah, going on here. Yeah, the streaks that you have here with the weathering, again, that's a really awesome technique that I have never tried, and I really want to, because I think it brings a lot of character. What exactly was your thought process on doing these streaks that come down, like the rust and like the dirt and the grit? Is this all, again, like you said, for military, or did you want to give it a special, like, you know, little character to it?
There really is nothing special. This is stuff that you always do on a tank. When you do streaks, a lot of people don't realize, most people think that you go top to bottom because water comes from top to bottom. Sometimes it's actually easier if you go bottom up instead. And now here's the thing.
Wow.
When you're doing weathering like this one, you are using brushes. So you get yourself familiar with using brushes and doing all the weathering. Now, when you do the weathering, you try to think about, you actually look at the way the surface is shaped to try to think of, like, if water is coming through the surface, how is it going to run? And instead of coming down straight, a lot of times you want it to run in some random direction, so you get some realism. Because what happens is, in real life, water don't come down like completely perfectly straight down sometimes, because there might be dirt in the way. It might deteriorate and go to in other directions and then come back to one direction. So you try to create some randomness in your weathering job.
Yeah.
And that gives it a realism, a feel to it. And also, typically when it comes to weathering, we try not to repeat the same weathering throughout the whole build. So you try to have multiple different type of weather at a different intensity, just to create a randomness. So when it comes to military build painting, that randomness is what really truly gives it a realistic feel to a weathering job. You do not want your weathering to be too evenly distributed throughout the build. So when you don't want it to be evenly distributed, you kind of have to think about exactly what area will get the most of this type of weather. Where would it have? Where would the rust collect in a certain areas, and then it comes down on a different spot. So it's, how should I say? It's basically painting a picture.
Yeah.
So you get to enjoy the build all over again. So you get to enjoy building the build, painting it properly.
Okay.
And then when you do the weathering, you're building the whole build all over again with another layer of paint on top.
Wow.
So
a lot of a lot of thinking into it. I would even go as far as to say as you're basically talking about doing precise randomness. It's very calculated, despite it being very random, in order to keep that realism.
Right.
Wow. Thank you so much, Scythe MW, for following. And Dronzy has a question for you, Simon. He says, what are your opinions on weathering with acrylics versus oils?
I did both. I use enamel, acrylic, and oil. Now, acrylic is super easy. Like for example, if your base color is a lacquer base color, technically if you put acrylic on, if you screw it up, you can use a little bit of thinner and just wipe it down. It won't damage the lacquer paint itself. So you can always change it, or you can correct every single mistake. Oil is different. You can always change oil because oil takes forever to dry. If you use oil to do weathering, sometimes oil can take over a week to dry properly. Until then, you can still change everything that you put on. So it gives you the flexibility to just try and error until it gets to a point that you really think this is it.
Yeah.
Acrylic is less of that, but hey, it dries within minutes. So saves you a ton load of time than waiting for it to dry, because especially weathering, you have to wait for one layer to completely cooled up, dried up before you do the second layer. So acrylic gives you the advantage that you can actually get 2 or 3 done in one night.
There you go. Well, there's differences. I think I would have, in this case, when I do weathering, I guess I'll go oil because I think I'll need some time to think about what I really want to do. Real quick, thank you so much, Sephiroth92, for gifting a tier 1 sub to 8 EK. Thank you so much, and I hope that you're enjoying the show. Now, I hope that answers your question, Dronzy. But with that, let's move on to these little figures here that are also from that same build of Metal Gear. Have you had experience, because these are very tiny, right? As opposed to, I think, military likes to work on a bigger scale. Is this the first time that you worked with these little figurines, or had you done it before with the past kits that we talked about?
This is probably the first time I tried to paint something so small, trying to achieve quality at this scale.
Yeah.
And this is actually what triggered what happened afterward, that I wonder, like, I wish I know more about hand painting, that I can do a better job.
Yeah.
So this is where it started. Like, well, it's small. Yeah. And at that time I didn't have my magnified visor, so it was not easy. But hey, that actually triggered the fact that I really want to dive into hand painting. Yeah. And it came out really well for me at the end of the day.
Wow. I've always had the curiosity to work and on the little figures. In fact, I have a little box with every time, you know, the master grades or even the real grade. Sometimes I think it's the Sasabi and the new that come with the real grades. Because normally in 1/144 scale you don't have little pilots. But I've always wanted to have a whole box full of them, and I do want one day to work with that. But you said something very interesting that I always think about, is getting that magnifying visor to even just work on something so tiny, because sometimes your eyes are just squinting the whole time, and I don't think I'll be able to do that. So I think that's a really cool tool. Would you agree that that's a tool people should have at their disposal?
If you're into using a brush, it changes everything. It makes hand painting, I would say, at least 10 times easier.
Wow. Well, there you go.
Don't forget, if you go to military shows, if you participate in IPMF, you will actually notice the judges, when they look at a piece, they use the magnified glasses. So for you to paint something, it needs to be good enough when you put it under magnified glass.
Yeah.
So that's the way it works in IPMS. So and there's a reason for that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, speaking of tomorrow, the GTS crew will be over at GOMS here in Calgary, which is the Grumpy Old Model Builders. I think that's what it means. I think
Hey, that's meant for me.
Yeah. Well, we were there. We were there last year, and we're gonna go back and do a full retribution kind of thing where we go back and actually film correctly instead of using a GoPro. But you guys will get to see a lot of military, since a lot of our military friends are in there. And it's something that I've been very interested in, and being able to see their work tomorrow is going to be awesome. But real quick, guys, if you guys have any questions, type them down in the chat, and I will try to get to them as soon as possible. Real quick, before we move on, I do have one more question for you, Simon, and then we'll talk a little bit more about, because I think we're getting right into the Psycho, right? So,
oh yeah.
Kid Chaos, aka Noble Mecha, says, how do you rust textures?
It's a lot easier nowadays. There are paint actually does it. So if you look into a Fillet Hold or probably AV, they would actually have paint called rust paint. When it cures, it actually gives you that sandpaper-like texture on it. It actually has volume to it, so it's not just a paint. It actually has residue in it to mimic a rusty kind of style texture.
Okay, well there you go, Noble. Now you know what to go out and buy. Thank you for that answer. But now we have the Psycho Mark II, if I'm not mistaken, right? It's the Mark II? Mark 1. Mark 1, sorry. Mark 1. With this one here, yeah, so this is your 2018 GBWC entry, right?
That's right.
And this is the beginning of this work, which I think is really awesome. I mean, all of your works up to now have been cool. But whenever I think of Simon Lam, I think of this and I think of hand painting. So let's talk a little bit of what the idea was, what you used, and real quick, thank you. Ted Bundy apparently has followed us. Anyway, yeah. So let's talk about this picture. What are we looking at?
Old school. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the Psycho Gundam. This is basically when after I finished 2017 GBWC, I asked myself, like, was it the best I can do? And my answer, that's the best I can do in 3 months. So if time is not an issue, what would I have come up with? And this is what I did. So typically, this is the first time I tried to create a build purposely for a competition. It's geared toward the competitions. So I have to ask myself, like, what do I build in the first place? So I come up with, so you kind of have to pick something that is not common. Like for myself, because you want to stand out, because you want to get attention, right?
Yeah.
So try to pick something that a lot of people won't even try to do, and Cycle is one of those things. Yeah. Now, but the question is, so there is an XG Cycle on the market. So how would I make it better? One thing I like, as much as I like Cycle Gundam, one thing I do not like about Cycle is because the transforming ability, the proportion of Cycle is kind of odd. It has a really huge chest, a small head, and extremely long legs. So if I don't have to do the transforming part, can I make Cycle 1 looks cool?
Yeah.
And so I end up looking at what I have. Like I said, there's a graveyard. And I told you before, my very first 2 kits that was been sitting in my bag for 20 years, one of them is a Grandpa 78.
Yeah.
So I figure, hey, what if I use the frame, the skeleton from the Grandpa, and then basically adapt the pieces from the Cycle XG onto a PG so that I can get the proportion that I really want.
Okay.
So that's how it all started. But when I start to put the 2 pieces together, for example, if you look at the first picture, you see the 2 heads.
Yeah.
The one on the right is the original XG, the Cycle 1 head, and the other one is after I did this, I transplant the face into a perfect gray Grandpa head. The difference in size is huge.
Yeah.
So then then everything goes downhill from there. Because to make this head work, I kind of have to enlarge everything so that it still kind of resembles the Cycle Gundam proportion.
Yeah.
So I end up, now one thing I wasn't paying attention to at the time, and I regretted it, is if I use a Strike Gundam PG as the frame, I wouldn't run into this problem. Because the LG78 was probably a 30 years old design.
Yeah.
Back in the days, the proportion on Bandai's model is different than what we used to see nowadays. If you look back to the first PG, if you take all the armors out and just look at the skeleton, you realize that the first PG is actually quite short. It's very stubby, like thick thighs and short.
Yeah.
But on the opposite side, Cycle has the biggest character is the long legs, right?
Yeah.
So I have to extend the legs on the Cycle by almost 2 centimeters, and then I have to widen the shoulder, the chest by about 1 centimeters to get it back to the right proportion. A lot of builders don't tend to do such kind of thing because either A, they didn't know they should do it, or B, they just got lazy and decided not to do it.
Yeah.
But I personally, I think the proportion means a lot, because now if you look at the second page, at the second picture, you will see the Cycle with the leg showings.
Yeah.
I even pushed the thighs to the very end of the waist part. So and then I actually have to thicken the thighs to get it back in proportion.
Yeah.
Because this is something that's quite new to me, because before we don't do this much modifications. Because one of the things, because the competition build, I try to go over and beyond when it comes to the detailing. I don't normally do that.
Yeah.
When you add a lot of details to a build, what happens is you're adding parts here, adding parts there. It actually throws the proportion off, like the whole thing becomes bulky. So in order to get it back to the right proportion, then you kind of have to extend things. But then when you extend things, don't forget I started out with an XG Cycle. Those parts don't fit the PG anymore. So instead, then you have to think of a different way to extend those parts. So it was a learning process for me, that I was keep finding problem and keep finding new ways to solve those problems. And this project took a good 1.5 years for me to finish.
Wow.
And from top to bottom, it's nonstop messed up and finding solution and correction and fixing it. And I really enjoyed this build.
Wow. I never knew how much work went into it. Like, I always knew that something had to go into it, of course, to make it look so beautiful. But the fact that you had to, it's that whole, like you said, that whole circle of finding a problem, finding a solution, but that solution brings another problem and having to work with that. And it just becomes this circle until eventually you get it done. And I think it came out wonderful too. Now, on the second, right here on number 10, we can see that you're starting to work on a little dio, right? A little base. Right. Was this also part, or is this something that was an afterthought, or did you originally want a Psycho with on a diorama? What was the whole idea of the whole diorama?
So what happened is, after I finished the Psycho itself, because of all the extensions, I kind of need a way to show the contracts now. So what I decided to do is that I included a second model into it. So I picked an XG Groove and snapped it into the picture. But then if I have two models together, for it to make sense, I need a diorama. So again, went back to the research part and find out what could possibly happen. And apparently the Titan was located in a mountain area, so I tried to do a mountain desert style of diorama for it.
Yeah.
So that I can actually place the two robots in the same scene, so that you can actually see the difference in size. So it was done for a purpose, but then I have to kind of add the story to it to so that it makes sense.
Yeah. So mainly then the idea of the diorama was to present the scale and to give the viewer a better sense of it.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So you opted for a goof, which the goof also went through some customizing, I'm guessing, aside from just painting, or did you do something special to the goof?
Nothing too special. It's mostly detailing. Yeah, because you don't want it to catch too much attention away from the Titan. So all I did was just some basic detailing, scribe lines, a minimal PLA work. But I try to use more like a desert color.
Yeah.
So that it blends in with the diorama. So its purpose is only to show the scale, but not to take any attraction away from the Psycho one.
Wow, that's very That's a very nice thought process, because now that you mention it, and if we go into the look of the diorama, so here I am on number 12. We can see the finished, of course, Psycho standing on top of this dio. And if we go back again to number 10, we're just flipping back and forth. You can see the color of them. And so with the Psycho, of course, being blue and vibrant with red and yellows all over, at the end of the day, something that we have to keep in mind, especially with dioramas, is having a focal point. And you want your focal point to be the Psycho in this case.
That's right.
Wow. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff to keep thinking of. But I think it came out lovely. I mean, if we go on to number, I think I am in number 13 here. I think it looks great, and I think you're right. When you first look at this picture, your eyes immediately go over to the Titan. And the whole idea of the dio, for it to have a purpose aside from a story, I just like how purpose came first and story came second. I think is something that I normally don't really get from other people talking about. It's like, hey, there's a purpose to this that's mainly just to kind of emphasize and build this other kit, as opposed to the goof that just goes, that's just there as a measuring stick, in other words. But I think it came out lovely. Now, the little platform that it's standing on, what is that, and where did you get it? Because it's super cool.
Oh, that's I don't even know where I get it. There's some kind of plaque that I got from ages ago. So I just took out the actual metal piece on top. And then this is basically whatever, the whole thing was done in air dry clay. The bridge itself, it came from military model. I think it's actually train models. It's an actual, they have a bridge in plastic. So what happened is I actually recast it using what did I use? Silicone molding. So I recast it in plaster. So what happened is when you recast something in plaster is a soft material, so you can actually chip it, you can dig into it, you can add scratches and all the weathering to it, so it looks look worn out, because it's a desert scene, right? So I want to have some kind of weathering on the bridge itself instead of something looking brand spanking new. So those are little tricks that we did if we do in military tanks or training models. It was really fun to do, to be honest with you. Like, I really love this build. Now, the problem with this build, I don't know if I should say it here, but it's because that year GBWC, there was the local competition, there was the online competition. One thing we were not too happy about the online competition, this was the same year Ryan won and went on and become 4th in the world. Bandai just announced Ryan as the champion for the online part, but they never even showed any of the entries. That's one thing I find it a little bit ill.
Yeah.
Like you have like 80 or 100 people who enter online. They all spend a lot of time and effort on the build. I would assume the least you can do is to show the entries so that people can see them, right? When you enter a competition, you want to feel like you participate in something.
Yeah.
And all you get is that you submit your pictures, and that's where it stopped, and that's it.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit disappointing.
Yeah.
But the process was good. Like, I really enjoyed it, and up to today, this is still one of my favorite builds.
Yeah, I think this build for me speaks, like I said before, like when I think of Simon, right, I think of this build, and I love how much love went into the whole detail process, and like even you explaining, like I said before, the circle of solution, problem, and the whole methodical method. Well, that's just kind of sorry. Just the whole methodology of you having to think of having to put something there for scale so it works for the viewer is great. And I know other people see it too. For example, here Droncy is saying, can you share your process with picking colors for dioramas? I'm not sure how to plan it out such that the environment accentuates the kit color.
Typically, okay, when it comes to color, at the beginning, to be honest, I go by just a gut feeling. So when you look at models long enough, you kind of have a feel for it. But once I started doing a lot of hand painting and I did a lot of research, and turns out it really helps if you know a bit of what we call the color theory. You don't have to be an expert in it, you just need to know the basics. So when it comes to color, so what are the complementary colors, what color will pop the other color nicely, and what will be good for a shade, because it really helps. Because what happened is before this whole thing, most people would think, oh, if I want to add highlight, if I want to add the shadow areas, I'll use black and white. Now, the problem with doing that is not as obvious in military model because everything is dull. But when it comes to a colorful Gundam or a fantasy figure painting, that adding white and black will actually have the result of desaturating the color itself.
Mm-hmm.
So you're gonna have to find a different color than white and black to become your shade or your highlight color so that you can retain the saturations.
Yeah.
Especially if you plan on doing a lot of weathering. So if you're planning on doing a lot of weathering, a lot of times the weathering itself would desaturate your overall color scheme.
Mm-hmm.
So you might want to start off with something more exaggerated, and then
Yeah.
when you start to do the weathering, it bring it down to the exact right level, so it's not too much or it's not too dull. So when it comes to a diorama, I would say it's keep it simple. If your build itself has the main tone of a cold color, then maybe have your diorama with a warm color, so that it has a good enough contrast.
Yeah.
But try not to use too many colors, because that typically a lot of times the problem is people using too many different colors, then it becomes confusing to look at.
Yep.
So you want, like, if I look at my builds, usually I would pick a main color and I will keep everything similar to the main color except one contrasting color.
Mm-hmm.
So that color will pop the details that I want them to pop.
Yeah.
So it brings back to the view when you do detailing, you have to ask yourself, what are the focal point? When people look at my build, where do I want to draw their attention to? Is it the face? Is it the chest? If you do too much details everywhere, then people might lose, oh, what should I be looking at, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. There you go, Droncy. That's a great answer there, and a lot to take in because it's a lot of thinking. Like I said, like it's one thing to just look at a kit and say, oh, looks awesome. There's another one to actually understand the process behind how it got to that point. I hope that helps, Droncy. I'm sorry, Simon, we have more questions here that are popping up. Noble Mecha here
problem.
ask, I want to know how you go about picking out spare parts to use to make details on a kit.
Completely random. When I find, okay, so here's the thing. In my graveyard, I don't try to organize them, so I just have random parts everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people actually do put them into the little categories. If I look for hands, this is where I look. If I look for legs, this is where I look. If I look for a fist, this is where I look. If I look for a fester or an exhaust, they all go into little boxes like that. For me, my personal choice is that I don't want to. Let's put it this way: if I'm going to use spare parts to create details, I don't want to use that spare part for what it is. I want to use it because it has the right shape that I want, not because it's a leg, so I will use it on a leg, or not because this is a hand, I'll use it on a hand. I have to separate myself from assuming, oh, because this is a hand, it should go to a hand. You have to get yourself away from that thought process and just look at the shape itself. Is this the shape I want? Does it have the details I want?
Okay.
And you can cut them out. You don't have to use it as is. You can always change it up, cut it, just take the piece that you need. I found that helped me by picking the right shape a lot of times. But there you'll find situation when you absolutely cannot find the shape that you need. Then it comes to scratch building. So you're gonna have to know how to do those as well.
There you go. I like that. That's actually something that I battled with myself too, is trying to, because I don't have a graveyard yet. I do have a lot of extra pieces on my runners inside the boxes, because a lot of people throw out their runners, but I don't. All my runners are still there, but with extra pieces still in them, most of them. And even just thinking about, well, what piece do I want to use? And lately I've been kind of playing with the idea of cutting things out and actually shaping things to what I want. And I think that's a perfect way of looking at it. If you're looking for a thruster, don't look for that specifically, but look for the shape that you want and how you can change it to what you need. I think that's great. Sephiro92 redeemed hydrate. I don't have any water with me, so I will get that right after the commercial break, which will be in a little, well, later on. But he does have a question. He says, how much has hand and figure painting helped you improve your skills coming back into Gunpla? So, yeah, take it away, man.
Okay, so if you hate masking, if you absolutely hate masking, learn how to hand paint. That's the best advice I can give you, because what happened is once you get a hold of it, there's a lot of detail spot that I used to mask every single thing.
Mm-hmm.
That tedious work is no longer needed. I can do it by hand, and it will come out as good as if I actually mask it out.
There.
So it helped, and a lot of things. One of the big problem when I was doing the Cycle Gundam is decals, because I have a specific story for it. That what if ALZ, what if TTT, Titan Test Team, get a hold of Cycle Gundam? What would they do with it?
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, there's a design in ALZ that actually used the Cycle hands and becomes the giant armor thing on the Hazel.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then what if they do the whole cycle under the ALZ thing? So that was the whole idea for this build. Finding
Wow.
the right decals for them
Yeah.
was a pain in the butt. So at that moment, I figured, no, if I know more about hand painting, if I can do a half decent job on hand painting, I don't need to rely on decals. So that's another reason why I venture into hand painting, is for that exact purpose. And you'll see in the build later that I actually decided not use decals at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's I love how you immediately said, if you don't like masking, then learn how to hand paint. That's crazy. Yeah, no, masking is terrible. So there you go, Sephiroth. Even Millennial Model Mayhem says he speaks the truth. So so Liam, Millennial Model Mayhem, is also a hand painter who comes from the Warhammer. So I don't know if you've heard of him or you talked to him, but he also hand paints a lot. So that's awesome. CRZC says, I got Prime available, let's go. And he just subscribed with Prime. Thank you so much for the subscription, man. Welcome to the GTS fam. Yeah, so really cool. But hey guys, as much as I want to just sit here and ask him questions, let's move on a little bit forward to the next one here, which is actually, speaking of the Hazel, we're looking at the Hazel here, right?
Right. So this is after the cycle. I kind of need a break, so I wanted to do something less stressful. So the idea at the time, because then after the cycle, I was doing a lot of judging for competition and all that. And one thing I do notice is I notice a lot of builder, when they enter the piece, the competition, they tend to overdo things.
Mm-hmm.
Like things becomes too complicated. The kit fashions becomes the main attraction instead of, and the basic skills are not there. But then you're putting 300 builds, different kits into one kit, and it becomes very clustery. So I want to do a project where it's simple, no nonsense, just all the basic techniques, inscribing, a little bit of detailing with power plate, paying attention to details. For example, the underskirt that you technically, we all detailed them back in the days. I notice a lot of people don't do that anymore because you can't see those places. If you do everything right, you don't have to turn a kid into something entirely different to have a good kid.
Yeah.
You can just build a Hazel as it is, but with your own twist to it, and it still looks amazing.
Yeah.
That was the purpose for this project, and it was a very relaxed, chilling, and fun build for me.
What I can see here, because this is the Hazel, this is a high grade?
This is actually, yes.
Yeah, so this is a high grade, and the reason I know that is because here you, so the picture that we have here on slide 17, you actually cut out the peg, because this used to be a whole piece. I'm guessing the reason you did that is so you can add articulation to both sides, which is little things that you can do to really spice your kit up and make it yours, as opposed to just having the regular thing, which is actually something that Simon and I were talking about before we got on the show, is how you can do little things to make it your own. One of the main things, as he mentioned earlier, was working with the extremities and the proportions of the kit. But here you're just adding articulation to where it didn't exist before, and now it's something different. And if we go on to the next slide here on number 18, we can see the final look of this high grade Hazel, because it's a high grade, and despite this kit, I'm pretty sure existing in master grade form, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's a P Bandai.
Yep.
This came out awesome. Like, how much did you scribe here, and what did you do?
It's a lot of scratches, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, on such a small scale.
Yeah.
Um, but that was the whole purpose. By not altering the overall look, you can still add detail that makes it look good.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
and people loved it.
Yeah. It the hazel is definitely one of those more peculiar designs and really cool because, well, the thing that I really like about the hazel myself is that it's chunky, but not too chunky. I don't know. It's got like a nice balance, I feel, especially with the legs.
I get it totally.
Yeah, like
that's how I like it too.
That's wow. And just the amount of detail that you were able to cram into this tiny high grade. And I say tiny because it's a 1/144th. And I have never worked on a high grade myself where I've scribed. I like working on master grades, but it just seems like it might be easier, but at the same time difficult because of the scale to really add those details and make them look as good as they look now. So would you, is this why you prefer high grades over master grades? Because I do remember seeing that part of the AO Mecha show when you were on his show and you said you prefer high grades.
Right. Well, it's not because of the size difference. It's more because high grade has less details on it.
Mm-hmm.
So with less details, it gives you more room to create your own design.
Yeah.
Master grade typically, especially those nowadays, have a lot of the details in it. If you look at the Washington Zabi, I honestly cannot find anything that I could add to it because it's already so detailed already.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing goes for algae as well. So for me to create something that I like or the design or pattern I like on scribing, then I kind of have to start with an HG.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're not the first one to say that. I know that Joshua Dara feels the same way. Even Ryan, and I feel that you guys share, especially when you get to a level of I don't want to say professional, but when you are in that tier, right, where you know what you're doing, you do look more for a blank slate as opposed to having something that's super detailed. And I completely agree with kits nowadays coming out with a lot of detail. We just saw it with the most recent Master Grade Eclipse Gundam. It has a lot of detail. And if you want to add more things to it, there's a lot of stuff that you're going to be either filling in with super glue and filing out or putty and then doing your own thing as opposed to just having a complete blank thing. And in fact, that's my biggest problem right now with the Dynamis, is that despite it, one, it doesn't have a lot of armor, but two, the armor that it does have does feature a lot of detail. So it's difficult to be like, okay, what can I add to this and what can I take off, and trying to strike that balance. So I guess, guys, you heard it here from Simon. Get a blank slate high grade. I know that Christian here on the stream says this stream makes me want to buy another one. Get a high grade and try to work your details on there. Definitely.
Hey, some people will go the distance. I don't know if you remember, it should be 2016. The GBWC champion was a new. I think it was a master grade new.
Yep.
The builder, what he did, he actually filled in all the original details that came with the kit and then create his own.
Yeah.
So some people would go that distance just to create something that they like, but it's just easier if I start with something with less detail, so I don't have to go for that tedious process, right?
Yeah, and I feel like everybody that I've talked to that has done GBWC or goes to that length of becoming one of the a great builder always mentions that master grade new from that GBWC. And I mean, it's gorgeous, don't get me wrong, but I just find it funny how you guys in some way are connected and kind of everybody just really fell in love with that news. Is there a specific reason why everybody mentions it aside from, is it because he started from complete scratch, or what is it about it?
Like for myself, I can't speak for others.
Yeah.
Is because it's different. Because if you take what's existing there and then you just add to it, then my build and Ryan's build or someone else's build, you will have areas where they're similar because those are what it came from. Mm-hmm. When it goes to the distance that you actually wipe out all that and create your own design, it makes your build unique. Yeah. And the fact that he did it so clean, so nicely, like it was like from a skill wise, it's a masterpiece. It's a flawless execution to that extent, and the design worked. So you don't see that quality, like a build at that quality, very often, and that was one of the classics. So that's why most people remember that. Just like if you look into Ola Zagu, that was one champion back in the days with the core fighter that was sinking in water and was looking up a cliff. that's another classic that people will remember for years and years to come,
Yeah.
because it was so beautiful, it was so perfectly executed.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, when you see built like that, you just remember them.
Yeah, you remember them. Yeah, that's a very good point. There's a lot of those builds out there. Well, no, lies. There's tiny builds out there that you really do remember like completely, and I guess that would be one of them. But now, moving away from the whole plastic scene in Gunpla here, we're moving on to, I guess this would be the first, well, not the first venture, but the first picture here completely on hand painting, which we have these figures here. So let's
Right.
talk about
So that shows you how old I am, basically. This comes with the first generation of master grade build.
Yeah.
A lot of them are actually not mine, because I only started painting the TriStar, and then everybody knew that I'm painting them. It's like, hey, I have those figures from the box. I just put them aside and never bothered to paint them because the sculpt was so ugly, and the plastic was soft. It was painted but to paint, and they all give them to me.
Wow.
So I end up with like 20, 30 of those pilots figures at the end of the day. And these are the couple one that I choose and paint them eventually.
Yeah.
I think a couple of them actually went into my current GBWC build for my pilot for the Tower 800. But this is how I started hand painting. This is my first time using acrylic paint, started hand paint.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a learning curve, especially the pilot itself. The detail is not really crisp because it was done in some kind of ABS plastic, so it's soft. So I can't even sand the seam line because it basically just scratch up the plastic.
Oh, okay.
So I really struggle with these one. I'm quite happy that they still look decent at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But just don't zoom into the details, and they're just not there.
Yeah.
But this is how it all started for me when it comes to hand painting. Like, this is my first attempt.
Wow. I know that for a fact the Bandai did have these kits because well, whenever you bought like a kit, aside from the little plastic figure, it would have the big one, right? So these are pretty big, aren't they? I know that the high grade, for example, the high grade Ava Unit 0 also comes with a Ray and what's it called?
That's right.
Shinji's dad in big form, and I have them. So if you want them one day, I could just send them over. And you can also get to painting those.
Send them over. Yeah. This comes in, I think I did the research. They comes in a scale 120.
Oh, really?
Which is a very unusual scale. This is a very unusual scale because military is 145. 120 is in between everything else. So
yeah.
The problem, because of it's at this scale, you can't really do much about it because really there isn't anything else that's at the same scale that you can put on, other than you just paint the pilot itself and put it next to your model.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was fun, but that piqued my interest in, because this is more animated characters, right? So after I done this batch, I wonder, okay, what if I try to do something more realistic? So if you can see probably the next slide, I have some military figures that I start painting.
Yep.
So kind of going back to my military background.
Yeah, these are something else. This is the kind of skill that I aim for one day, is being able to paint at this scale the figures, because as much as I haven't worked on them, I think I have mentioned to the audience that I've been wanting to work on either a military helicopter or anything of that sort, and even hard graph kits from Bandai, which we'll get into in a little bit. But now that you got a taste of hand painting with the previous slide, and now we're going into more realistic, can you tell us a little bit about how you felt working with this scale and how, with the experiments and like the I would say the hardships of getting to this skill level? Like, was it difficult?
Now most people would think hand painting is like hardcore difficult stuff. Like, to be honest, it's not. Okay, drawing takes talent. Drawing is hard, but painting, it takes practice. Because at the end of the day, like the sculpture is already there. So you don't need to, you just have, basically you're filling in the blanks. Okay, but you need to practice so that you can apply it smoothly, so that it's clean, at the time at that skill level. So I wasn't thinking about shade and highlight and all that at all. I
Mm-hmm.
just want to fill in the blanks nicely.
Mm-hmm.
That takes practice. Once you've done that, then you want it more. So you wanted to, okay, now I can apply the paint smoothly. How do I do the shadows? How do I, what about the colors? How do I make something brighter, lighter, or something more closer to a skin tone? Because when you're doing animation, the skin tone color is pretty, how should I say, it's pretty uniform and dull. When it comes to a real military figure or a real person, then getting the right skin tone, it's a big topic. It's actually a
Yeah.
chapter on its own. How do you paint skin? And when it comes to hand painting, um, it opens up a basically opens up a door for me to peek into it, and I found so much from it.
Mm-hmm.
And I highly recommend, like, if you're into modeling, try it. It doesn't hurt, and you'll find out using acrylic paint to hand paint is a lot easier than you thought, because those paint nowadays are actually developed for hand painting. So if you worry about the brush strokes and all that, it it rarely happens on acrylic paint at all. But
Okay.
what you need to understand that you need to know how to thin it properly. And if you never do hand painting before, I would highly suggest that you get the right tools to begin, because if you don't have the right tools, you get frustrated because the result doesn't come out the way you wanted it.
Yeah.
A wet palette, do some research. Either you create your own wet palette or you purchase one from the store. Get
Yeah.
a half decent brush. Don't get the top premium one right from the get-go, because you're going to destroy them. But at least get some decent brush,
Yeah.
because a lot of time people think they did a bad job. The brush itself contribute to that. So if you have a crappy brush, there's even a master might not be able to do a good job with them. So get something half decent. That's all you need to do.
Half decent.
Um,
Okay.
Try them, because you find out. Because okay, this is the thing. When it comes to hand painting, if you know what you're doing, then obviously you do a good job. If you don't know what you're doing, there's a cheat. Well, I wouldn't call it a cheat, but there's an easy approach when it comes to hand painting, especially when using a wet palette. Because what happens is most of the time you're trying to layer color on top of another layer.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to hand painting, because you're actually painting at a paint that's almost like a water texture. So if you spat water on the table, would you see brushstroke? No, because
No.
water is so thin that it level itself.
Oh, okay.
All you don't want is to have the paint too watery that it actually beats up on your plastic surface.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're going to end up with the bad result, because it becomes a little rain here and there.
Yeah.
If you can get the consistency right when you paint it, and it actually level itself out, you will never ever see brushstrokes. The problem with painting with a very diluted paint is that because the saturation, the color, the pigment is not all there. If you want to get the color to start to saturate in one or two applications, it's not going to happen. If you're willing to paint the same thing over and over, like 10 layers, 15 layers, the colors start to saturate, start to build up, and you will end up with a perfectly smooth finish with the color you want. Now, the good thing about doing that is that because you're slowly building up layer after layer,
Yeah.
it gives you a lot of margin of error. So you, because you're slowly seeing the color coming to alive, if you don't like it, you want to make changes, you can all do that.
Mm-hmm.
And with watercolor, I mean acrylic watercolor, they dried up. Technically, the way we do it, like if you have just painted an area and it's after 10 seconds, you don't touch it because you might just rip the color apart. So you just leave it there, and the whole thing will actually dry within a minute. So no, the normal progress, we paint on one area, and then we move on to the next one, move on to the next one. By the time I move on to the third areas,
Yeah.
the first area is dried already, and then go back and do another layer
Okay.
until I get to the saturation I want. So it's a very slow process that you build up the color. So it's a lot easier to control to get a good result. So I don't know why people say they're scared of hand painting, but if you do it this way, you don't have to be scared, because the whole process is very slow. The only thing you need is patience, because you don't want to go back to an area when it's not dry.
Yeah.
Then that it will really mess it up.
Yeah.
If you're willing to have, if you have that patience to don't touch it until it's dry, then go back and do it. Uh, it's pretty straightforward, and it's pretty guarantee that you get a good result out of it.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid, just try it. Even if it's a lot of people wonder, oh well, I can't paint a big surface with hand brush because of that reason. I have to use an airbrush. That's BS.
Yeah.
You can do big surface no problem if you know how to do it, if you do it right.
Yeah.
And if you use that very diluted paint, you do it layer after layer, you don't have to worry about anything. So I highly suggest people to try it, because what happens is, if you have this skill set, then you have options. Because sometimes, especially when you do Gunpla, you will find situations where you have to build something first, then paint it. I cannot separate them and paint them separately.
Yeah.
So if you do hand painting, that process becomes less of a hassle for you, because I can just do the same line and then paint them separately by hand.
Yeah.
In the other hand, if you don't do it, then you might have to find a way to cut the joints apart so they can actually take them apart, separate them, spray them individually, and snap them back together with the weakened joint. But then now that you have options, you can choose whatever you feel like, or whatever that's better for that situations. So that's why I suggest people, when you do Gunpla is not just Gunpla. Gunpla basically, it's a combination of all different modeling skills all together into one. So you kind of have to know a bit about everything to be able to do a good job in Gunpla. So that's my advice.
There you go, Sephiroth. Not Sephiroth, sorry. There you go, Dronzy, and everybody who's been asking about hand painting. And I guess you're right. Yeah, it's not about being scared. It's just about having patience, which I think is the key to a lot of anything in this hobby, is patience. I know that I am at fault when I have been very impatient and I've messed things up when I've been working on them, just because I get angsty. You know, I want things to be done quick, but it's that level of patience that people need to learn how to have. But with patience, let's move on to this hard graph here. We're just gonna talk about it real quick, and I just want to get your point of view on the hard graph line. What do you think of the hard graph line of the UC Century, or the UC Century?
That's Bandai's attempt to come back to the military, or to please the crowd that does military build. I don't know if most people know, the Bandai originally started as a military modeling company before they start building this. They start issuing Gundam. So this is going back to their origin by trying to do something at a military scale. It's 1/45, so that people can actually mix and match military models to it to create scenes that they want. It's more like a what if thing. Usually people I see use hard graph to create dioramas, and because that's mostly what we usually do in military models. We don't just build a model itself. We try to create a story, a scenery, something that's happening. And for this one, I was doing a group build. What I don't know how to pronounce it. I think it's called Viginet. So it's not a full-size diorama. So it's basically a mini-sized diorama that's capturing a moment in time.
Yeah.
So typically when we do that, we try to have something that's in action, but then freeze it at that time frame. So, and it doesn't have to be big. It can usually be pretty small. And that was that approach. And I found the hard graph is perfect for that, because then you get, because it meets all my needs. It's a bit of military, at the same time it's sci-fi, and has a pilot in it, and I can use any military pilots. That's the key, because 145, I have a lot of options when it comes to the pilots. The funny thing is, if you actually try one of these, you'll find out the pilot size. I don't know if because Japanese is shorter or not. If you compare to regular military models, they are short.
Wow.
Don't know why, but they are.
Yeah.
At least they feel like they're 5 feet versus the other guys are 6'4".
Yeah. I noticed that. I have a hard graph once, and I do agree with you. Yeah, they seem kind of small, don't they?
Yes, they do. Yeah, but this are perfect for me, because this is exactly how I started, like doing the weathering, doing the military style. Yeah, so when I do green color, I feel comfortable. I feel right at home.
Wow. Okay, so it's kind of like welcoming you home. To think that even this whole kit if I'm not mistaken, when they're in the runners, they're all green. It's all green.
Yep.
It's all green.
Yep.
So the fact that now we see the shades, that's not the shade of green that it comes with. It comes with a darker, kind of like just dead green, and all the shading and little weathering bits here and there. And I just love the whole line, mainly because it meets World War II design with a sci-fi, as you said, and it just kind of has a great balance. But as Gadex, aka Derek, is saying here, sadly, it tanked in the audience. It didn't have a lot of people buying it, which I think is very sad, too. We were talking about this yesterday, I think, Simon, you and I, about how I thought they were a little bit more rare, but apparently you can get them still. But I just remember when I first started out this hobby that I was told that whenever I see a UC hardgraph kit, if I have the money to buy it, because then you probably won't see it there in a while. Hi!
Daniel, you're live. Yeah, that's my boy.
All good. All good. Real quick, Dronzy says, pretty scared to get into the scale modeling. The military model community gives you shit if the scaling is off.
Not hard graphs though, because this is sci-fi altogether. Like you can't complain about what's real and what's not, because it ain't real.
Yeah, look for hard graph. Look for hard graph, Dronzy. I can say that. They're pretty cool. You can find them and get them. So if you see a hard graph, I think they might be a little bit expensive. I don't know how much they are over on in the Philippines, but I know that one of the stores here in Calgary has a hard graph kit that I really want. But I think it's like $110, $130. But it's the one with the tank. The tank, like.
Oh, that's actually a big one too.
Yeah, it's a big one. So
yep.
So I might get it whenever I have the money, and I'll definitely be hitting you up to work with that. But real quick, guys, we're gonna go on a real quick little commercial break. Let me put that on right now, and we'll be right back. Yeah.
So you want realism, but then you don't want to go to that extreme, because it just doesn't work as a model.
Yeah.
So a lot of people worry too much when it comes to military model, but it's just ignore those people who say, oh, that's not the right green, that's not the right color, or the soil. People are picky to a point that the soil color is wrong. Yeah. Afterscan has redder mud than this. Like that's just too much.
Yeah, there you go, Dronzy. I know you heard a little bit of that, Dronzy. And I think that's the thing is, and I know we've spoken about this before. And while I'm talking here and I'm talking to Simon, I'll be scrolling a little bit through his pictures here of the other little figures that he has. But on the topic of military, you guys have to remember that a lot of military enthusiasts in the model building, the plamo scene, are a little bit from the old school, right? Not talking about age, or maybe I am, okay? But they kind of were brought up with these techniques, right? Which they feel shouldn't be moved, and you get a lot of elitist people. Now, with that said, speaking of GOMs that we're going to be at tomorrow, which we will record a video and put it on YouTube for you guys, there are a lot of people within the scene that are willing to kind of get into Gunpla, especially with Gunpla taking over the plamo scene. Let's face it, Gundam has grown, Gunpla has grown, and hearing it from them as they've spoken about this, it's just kind of dipping their feet into this new medium, because Gunpla is very forgiving, I think, because like we were just talking about, Simon mentioned, people like to really badger others about whether something is real or it's accurate, but you really can't be super accurate with Gundam. And you guys got to remember, Gunpla is freedom, which is a really famous saying out there. Gunpla is freedom. What do you think, Simon? I mean, you work in both realms. What is the main distinction between them, and do you prefer one over the other, or do you think that both are the same?
The way I look at it depends on what you're working on. So you actually have to change your mentality. Like if I'm working on a military model, you have to think in a certain way that's particularly for that type of modeling. If I do in Gunpla or something else, especially when it comes to military scene, a lot of people look at realism as the number one thing they have to achieve, that everything has to be real, that looks exactly like how it is in real life, forgetting the fact that you can have the perfect skill to do exact like things that looks perfectly real, but yet you can still have a crappy build because it just doesn't look good. So it's a lot more than just realism. A lot of time we think about the compositions. Is there a story in it? The execution, it's only part of it. And to be honest, like sometimes you actually don't want things to be too real. Give you an example. If you do camouflage on a tank, the idea is so that the tank can blend into the environment, right?
Yeah.
So if you do a diorama for a tank with the perfect camo that's doing its job, technically, then you're not seeing the tank. So for a model, then where's the focus on this build? So there are things that the concept actually contradicts itself. When it comes to military, a lot of times they actually, because they have to emphasize the subject, and they do things that's not real. If you look it up, there's a lot of what we call the color modulations technique to being used in junk right now. And the way that the shading is worked on color modulation is actually not realistic. So, but the idea is to pop the subject. So I think I look at it at the end of the day, it's visually is a piece of art piece that you're doing. So you have to look good at the end of the day, more so than it has to look real. Obviously, I will do my research. I will try to stick to the history as much as I can. But when it comes to the visual presentation, I think you still have a lot of rooms to do your own thing and don't have to worry about whether it's the right color or the wrong color. Don't forget, military's models, like look at the tank. What are the colors? They're either green or they're either sandy color. So everything is just monotone. So you kind of have to have some ways to pop to make sure that even though it's the same color, you're still seeing the details in every single different panel, have a different shade. You still have to do all that to actually to pop your subject, so that as a viewer, I look at it, it looks good. So it's not the same as just saying, no, I have to do it. It has to look exactly realistic. But scale is important, because if scales is off, then it throws everything off. So there are certain things that we do very careful with, but when it comes to using color, I wouldn't be. So if someone tells you, oh, that green is too light or that green is too dark, you can just tell them it was shot in the middle of the day, it was cloudy, or the sun was bright, that's why it's so warm. You can always have your background history to explain why this happened.
So people don't mess with your view and your vision and your creation.
Exactly. It's similar to Gunpla scene when people say use the wrong decal. Same concept. Like,
They stole
okay,
it. They
so
put.
what is the wrong?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
There is
basically.
RX-78 that's in green that has the GN color and the GN emblem on it, and that's legit too. It's actually showed up in the game.
Yeah.
So don't worry too much about those kind of things. But I think you need to focus on how are you trying to project your subject
Yeah.
and make it look visually pleasing. That's more important than actually sticking to the history, sticking to all the fact and all that.
Yes. I agree with you, man. That's a great. Guys, we're gonna move on here to what I think is the Bandol, if I'm saying it correctly. This is the Bandol from the 5-star series. We were talking about this guy yesterday, because I love it. I know that there is. I think it's the Mirage. Is it called the Mirage?
No, this is just the Bandol.
No, this is the Bandol, but there is one called the Mirage, right?
There is, yes, the LED.
Yeah. So we were talking about this guy, and we kind of actually got into the topic of how sharp and dangerous these things can be, and the reason why Bandai doesn't have any sharp edges on their own kits. But since this is a different company and not Bandai, they don't really have to worry about that, right? Let's talk a little bit about this. I love the color purple, and I love the shading around the. This is more like pre-shading or highlighting, whichever one it is, around the edges of the details.
Right.
What was your? So, if we go on with what you've talked about, which is accuracy and trying to stay true to the topic, you basically had to have an actual reference for this, right?
Right.
So let's talk about it.
This is the actual color of the Bandol. What I did change is, you see, on the shield, there's the little orb there. I actually changed that into green, and I actually hand painted some sculpt head and some faces in there. That's my little twist to the whole build. Now, the reason why well, first of all, I'm a big fan of 5-star stories. I always love them. And the reason why I painted this one is because at this point, I've been hand painting for about a year then.
Yeah.
I feel comfortable enough to say, hey, other than an organic subject like a soldier or a hillman, let's try the macro this time and try the large scale and see how hand painting works on it. So typically what I do on this one, you see that little different in shade and tone. It's something similar to what we call stipple painting. So instead of just painting the color down, I'm using the brush to try to stipple the color to create those darker shade, and then cover it with the main tone color to a point that it looks like a pre-shading process, like when you use an airbrushes. So the color is coming through, but it's not in your face.
Yeah.
I love that. I personally, this is my preferred way of hand painting because it gives that organic feeling to it.
Yeah.
Because if I want to hand paint something to look perfectly even, I can do that with an airbrush in seconds. So why would I want to spend hours painting a surface to look something I can achieve with an airbrush easily?
Yeah.
So when I do hand paint, I try to give it some kind of texture that cannot be done with an airbrush.
Okay.
So this is the end result of it. I like something that has some randomness in it. So there's always different tones, different shades on the same surface. For me, it gives me an organic feel to it. Now, I don't know if you know an animation called Gunpla. So there's macros that has like an insect design to it on the armors, and that's the kind of macro design that I would draw to. So and this is how I painted this with that kind of impressions.
Okay, I can see it here, and wow. I mean, I think you said something extremely important there, which is, why do this with the airbrush when I could give it its own unique touch with a hand brush, right? Actually, hand brush.
Right.
And you mentioned that on the shield with these little green parts with the faces and the skulls, this was hand painted. That's
right. Well, the whole thing is hand painted.
Like
there's no.
So I mean, the thing is, I'm on slide number 29, where you took the close-up picture of those skulls, and they look smoky. They look like they're floating inside. They're not stationary. They have some semblance of movement within it, like it's smoky. and you hand painted this.
That's right.
I mean,
so this is why you hand paint. Let's put it this way, because what happened is you get a lot more control over the transparency of the color itself.
Yeah.
So what I end up doing, basically, I painted the base, well, the art are all painted in black first, and then I sketch out the skeleton, outline it with white, and then I use the transparent green to do layers on top. So it's layer after layer until I get the tone that I want, and then I do the glossy overcoat on top. So it gives you that how should I say it, that feeling that it's trapped inside a glassy orb.
Yeah,
so
that's
it's not on the same level, it's not on the surface, it's actually underneath the paint.
Yeah.
That's the kind of effect that you can achieve if you hand paint.
This is the craziest. I was about, can I cuss here? I can't, right? This is just the craziest fucking thing I've seen tonight. And how cool these skulls look. I mean, even Kid Chaos here is like, I love those skulls. They look like they're in a jar. Wow. I mean, look at the one all the way to the right, guys. So for the viewers, all the way to the right, the last one, just look how nice that looks. Wow. So this is the kind of detail that you can have with hand painting, which I think is nuts.
That's right.
Completely nuts. And I congratulate you on that because it looks amazing. And even just looking on to the next slide here, this turned out great. I love the way the color on the sword looks faded with white. It doesn't look completely uniform, and just the whole muted look of the kit. I think it came out perfect. This has got to be one of your favorite things you've ever worked on, I'm guessing.
It is. The build quality wise, I still prefer Bandai because things really don't snap together that well. Yeah. But designed, it's phenomenal because Nakato's design is a classic, to be honest. And because it has that beautiful knight armor style, it's actually a perfect candidate for me to paint in my kind of hand painting style. Overall, this is one of my favorite hand painting jobs, and fortunately, I think I placed in top 10 in some competition with this still. I was quite happy with the result with that.
Wow.
The other thing I tried on this one alone is hand painting metallic color. That was a little test that I did because is it possible to do a nice metallic color without using an airbrush? And it turns out it worked quite well. But it's really depending on the color choice, the branding. There is a particular brand that I like, and the particular series that I like that works for me.
Yeah.
That I can actually hand paint a metallic nicely.
Yeah. Wow. Man, I'm sorry. Seeing those skulls and just listening to this has made me reach a new level of love for this build, because I had seen it before. So if I ever do meet up with you in person and see you at your place, you better keep this away from me, because I'm gonna take it. All right, this is awesome, man. Great work. Wow. Let's keep going on, because this is where we start really getting into where I feel like you mentioned about the 5-star series kit that you did. You said you started feeling more confident. You felt more comfortable with hand painting, so you really felt like you could do what you wanted to do. And I feel like these next figures really kind of exemplify that to its fullest, because I feel the level of workmanship on these next few ones really shows how you've grown in this medium of hand painting. Especially like right here, what we have, which is the samurai that has that really iconic wave in the back that you see in a lot of Japanese paintings and all of that.
Right.
And you even have a Canadian toonie there for scale. So it is tiny.
Oh yeah, this is small. It's actually a gift from a friend. He came back from the Suzuki show in Japan, and there was a souvenir to get at the door. It's actually a Tamiya figure. They actually sell this at one point, but they decided to give it away as a souvenir. So I want to do, because what happened when you start dive into hand painting, the ultimate question I guess every hand painter will have at the end of the day is how how tiny, how small can you possibly paint. So this is the project to try to find out that limit for myself.
Hmm.
So I pick obviously a very famous painting from back in the days, and I try to recreate it on the back of the samurai. Overall, now that I look back to it, I actually could do a better job now than at that time, but that was the best I can do at the time.
Yeah.
And it still comes out very nicely. But like I said before, the most important thing when it comes to hand painting is you need your magnifying visor. Without that, this would not be possible.
That secret tool that you can buy. It's like $20. Just get one.
Yeah, and if you start to do hand painting, when you start to do detail painting in particular, then the control of the water, the paint consistency becomes very critical.
Yeah.
So this is actually really great practice for you to actually get the paint consistency just right.
Yeah.
Because what happens if it's not diluted enough, the paint actually dry before, because you'll be using a smaller brush. When problem with smaller brush, it picks up less paint onto the tip of the brush.
Yeah.
So, but acrylic dries so fast, there are times that it could happen that once you dip the brush into the paint, before it hits your model, it actually dried already.
Ah.
So,
okay.
so painting in detail has it's very taxing for your control for the paint consistency. Too diluted and you will not have a solid enough color to it. Too thick and they will dry up, become a little chunk, and you just cannot paint small details with a chunky paint.
Yeah.
So it's a very good exercise.
There you go. Noble Mecha wants to ask, how do you keep brushes from splintering?
It will happen no matter whether you like it or not. But there are things that you do to try to maintain the brush. Nowadays, I stopped using synthetic brush altogether. The reason being, I've tried a lot of them, and so far none of them managed to last more than 2 months without developing the hook. So it's very common when you do hand painting with synthetic brushes. After a while, the tip of the brush become a little hook. You can still paint with it. It doesn't really stop you from doing the job, right? But it's just annoying. So I switched to using real fur, mostly saber. How do you say that? That's a very difficult. Swarovski fur, which is like the premium quality brushes. With those brushes, they will last you a long time. Like typically, a size 1 or size 2 brush lasts me about 6 months to a year. That's non-stop painting.
Mm-hmm.
What you do, you have to learn when it comes to painting acrylic, because acrylic dries so fast, you have to develop a habit of washing your brush almost every other minute. So sometimes it gets to a point that after every stroke, I would dip my brush into my water fountain and just rinse it off before I dip paint again.
Mm-hmm.
So that helps you maintain the tip, because what happens is over time the paint was sucked into the ferrule of the brush itself, and it actually yanked away the brush from forming the tip, which is the most important part. It has to be able to form the tip. So if you don't have that kind of like exercise by cleaning it every now and then, every other minute, it will die very quickly. But there are chemicals that you can try to salvage, or after a big job, you do a major cleanup. There's stuff that you can buy in an art store that clean up the brushes. But the key is not to let it develop to get to that stage in the first place. Try to maintain at top quality at all time. And that's something you actually have to develop when you start doing hand brushes. At the beginning, I can tell you I have destroyed a lot of expensive, good quality brushes like in weeks. Sometimes even in days, I would destroy a $40, $50 brushes, and it's over time. I finally get a feel for it and develop the habit of washing it nonstop. To give you an idea, I've only been hand painting for a little over 2 years, but I'm talking about spending 4 hours every single night, 7 days a week for 2 years straight. That did not stop for 2 years straight.
Yeah.
So I go through brushes a lot when I'm
yeah, at that rate,
yeah, you're to where I'm at right now.
That's 28. What is that? 4 hours per day, 7 days a week.
Pretty
what
much,
is that?
Yep.
That's 28 hours a week.
28 hours a week.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Guys, what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go through some of the pictures here. while I ask Simon some questions that some of our audience members asked over on the GTS Discord channel. So if you guys want to, you guys can join the GTS Discord server. You guys will find various channels there, and one of them being the GTS questions for guests. So we're going to go through them while I just go through some of the pictures that he shared here with us, and then we'll eventually come back and talk about whatever we landed on at that point. But Simon, let's start off with the nameless one. Kathy, she asked, for Simon, I loved his toll row scratch build. How does he start when he's just got a couple of pictures?
Yeah, that's something I'm working on right now. Okay, when you do a scratch build, you try to decide, well, first of all, you have to determine two things. Whether you want something that mimics the illustration 100%, or you want something that resembles it, give you the same impression that it is that illustration, but it doesn't look exactly the same. You have to pick either one approach. I would say to have your own interpretation of that illustration, it's a lot easier, and that's how I decided to do with the Toro 800. Unfortunately, I can't really show, still a work in progress on that build, but because that was a build meant for a competition, so my thought process is, because it's for a competition, if I just copy someone else's design to turn it into my work, you might lose points on the creativity portion. Because you're basically, someone already had the design for you, you're just trying to make it happen. So I try to do in my own interpretation to provide the kind of impression on it, but it's not the same, but it gives you that impression that that's the Toro 800 that's in the illustration. So that was my approach to that project. Once you have that decided, then it's just a matter of shopping and looking at everything they have to find the right shape at the right size that you have. And if you don't have that, then you just have to scratch build. And that's mostly what happened with that build.
There you go. All right, Kathy. Hope that helped you out. The next question is from Magic Mike, aka Cham Tatum, who says, how do you hand paint acrylics so smoothly, especially on small areas?
I think we touched base on that before.
Yeah.
It's basically, you do a very diluted paint, just do a lot of layers so that you build up the color. That way you will never have to worry about brush strokes.
There you go. There you go, Magic Mike. The next one is from Atros, who says, do you have a favorite type of model genre, sci-fi, fantasy, historical, cars, etc.?
If you look at my builds, you see I'm jack of all trades, master of none, basically.
There you go.
I like everything. I do everything from planes to battleship, tanks, sci-fi, sculptures, and all that.
There you go. You kind of just dip your hands in anything, which I think is a great mark for any builder, is not being picky with your medium and being able to adapt to it. Which I really do like how you say a jack of all trades, master of none. Which I feel some people would beg to differ on that, especially with your hand painting and in general your creativity. But yeah, definitely something that that I've seen you do. It's not completely Gunpla, which is my favorite part, because as much as I love the Gunpla scene, sometimes it can become stale, right? Sometimes you've seen it and you see it again, you see it again. It's nice to have a nice breath of fresh air, and being able to talk to Simon, who is somebody who has experimented and explored these areas, is really refreshing, but yeah. Then yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, at the end of the day, you want to ask yourself, like, what type of modeler you want to achieve at the end of the day. Like for myself, I would consider that, hey, if I want to be the kind of modeler that if I have a picture, an image in my head, I would be able to actually create that in real life. Mm-hmm. So for that to happen, I kind of have to know a bit about everything, so that whatever that the concept is, I can actually create it. And if I know nothing about, let's say, doing resin for water, then if I want to do a water scene, then my options are limited. I might have to change my design or change my concept to sacrifice those things because I don't have those kind of skill set. Yeah. So that's why I try to dip my hands into every single thing, so that when that kick-ass idea comes along, I can actually make it happen. I don't have to change it. I don't have to alter it, and I can present it at the way I want it. So that's one of the reasons why I want to try everything.
There you go. That's a great answer. That's a great answer there. And a silly question Jess will never ask, but I am asking it, Atros. Says, why do you think Jess hates the unicorn? Is it pure hate or denial?
I'll leave it to Jess.
Leave it to me.
Why do you hate unicorn? I actually don't know. Why do you hate unicorn?
I don't.
You know what? I'm with you on this. I'm not a big fan of the unicorn myself.
And that's the thing. Like, okay, look. I think people get it wrong, all right? It's become so diluted that people forget that I don't hate the unicorn design. Like, I think it's a pretty cool design on itself. Is it my favorite? No, it isn't. You know, my reason for hate is just that it's become the poster child for, in this case, for Bandai when it comes to Gunpla. I mean, it even has its 1-to-1 scale in Japan when there are so many other ones that I feel would, you know, benefit from that. But even then, you just have a bunch of unicorns everywhere coming out all the time when they have so many things that they could come out with, especially with how, you know, their design team is such, they're amazing when it comes to bringing out, like, for example, the RG Zong that came out just, you know, in the beginning of the year. You have I know that a lot of people say that the RX-78 II is something that exists everywhere, but hey, I can take the RX-78 II because it's the first one, it's the original, it's the classic, right? Just like Optimus Prime is a classic, just like the Ava Unit 1 is a classic. But the unicorn is just everywhere. It's gotten to the point where I'm tired of it. I'm just tired of seeing it. I feel like yeah. Go for it.
That's the reason why I don't like it that much either.
Yeah.
It comes in every single color in the rainbow, right?
Yeah.
So I think they overdone it. They milk it for too long, and it's just become tiring over time.
Yeah.
It's time to move on to something new.
Yeah. I mean, look, if my wife was here, she would say, you know, when we first saw the unicorn, we thought it was super cool. Like, you know, the whole transforming from unicorn mode to destroy mode, I was like, whoa. But nowadays it's just like, oh, another unicorn. Anyway, that's my thing. Just there you go. Dronzy says, oh no, so Dronzy was already here and he already asked that question on stream. But we have another one from Herbie who says, have you considered drawing and making your own designs in physical form?
I have actually, because I don't know if you're aware, there's a competition called My Original Maker. I think Andrew, one of my friends, actually won it last year. That's something I want to tap into, like to create my own design that's not Gunpla, not anything but my own design. So it will start on scratch on paper too. So yeah, it's something that's gonna happen.
There you go. There you go. And now moving on, I'm going to move on here a little bit. I'm going to skip forward to this one because this one really caught my eye when I was putting everything together. And I love this piece so much, mainly because it reminds me of Deus Ex Machina, which is the android that we have here. Now, I love this piece so much. And so I'm on slide here. I'm on slide 47. Yeah, it's
right.
Great, man. Tell us a little bit about where this is from. This is an android. Is this just a generic android? Where did the reference come from, or is this all from your mind?
This is a gift from a friend. I believe the kit, the sculpture itself, it came from one of the winter festival in Japan. So I think it's a limited production. It's a 3D printed from the original guy. The reason why I like it, remember I told you that I like when I paint, I want something that feels organic to me.
Yeah. And
when it comes to this sculpture, I look at it and I go, it has the human factor in it.
Yeah.
And it has the mechanical factor in it. I'm like, this is perfect for me. At the same time, when you do hand painting, people might tell you the ultimate challenge is try to paint girl, especially girls' faces, to make them look pretty. So, you know, I took on the challenge. Overall, it's a really interesting paint job for me because what happened is now, because it's so big, this is actually scale, if I remember, it's scale 1/6 or 1/8. It's huge. It's almost 12 inches tall. Now, the skin tone becomes critical because it's so big. It takes up such a large area. So how do you create a skin tone that believable? So if you look at the legs, and you can see I actually try to draw the veins under the skins.
Yes.
And then let the color come through.
Yes.
So these are things that you do when you paint figures, like you try to get it as real as possible. And again, this is the kind of thing that you can do on acrylic paint because you're taking advantage of the transparency of the paint itself.
Yeah.
And I loved it. But up to this day, I still haven't created a base for it because I kind of wanted a base for this build. You know how the RoboCop has a little station where you recharge? Something like that, but I just didn't have the time to finish that, so it's still sitting on my desk right now.
Oh, really? This is... I told my wife when I was looking at this, I'm like, is it just me or did he try to do veins there?
It is, and it worked.
I mean, for sure it worked, man. This is wonderful work. It really reminds me of that old style of animation that you get to see in, for example, what is this called? Appleseed? No.
Oh yeah, Appleseed.
Yeah, yep. But even further, like Akira, or what's it called?
Akira?
Yeah, yes. Like this level of mechanical design that you can see all the little details, all the little cables. Is not oversimplified. In fact, it's a little bit more technical and a lot more complicated than it shows. And I really do like this piece because of that. I mean, even looking at the back part here on the vertebrae, the pelvis, even just the joints in general, I think even the color choices that you have here with the blue and the orange contrasting each other look wonderful. But one of the questions here that Noble Mecha has is, how do you make a skin tone color like this one? Like,
well, okay, depends of who you're trying to paint, because this is obviously it's a Japanese design, and so I try to create an Asian skin tone that is more on the pale side because Japanese. So you started off with actually just a white primed, and then you just try to build up the skin tone layer over layer until it's not too saturated. You can still see the white coming through. That's pretty critical when you do faces, because sometimes you want to have the blushes from the faces to show through the skin so that it looks realistic. So
yeah.
And with a very pale base, it's actually easier compared to maybe if you do a black person's skin tone, because everything is dark there. It's actually harder to show those little details.
Yeah.
But for this is actually it's easier than the other ones because it's so pale on the skin tone.
Yeah. No, this is there you go, Noble. Yeah, this is I love it, man. I can't wait to see you finish it, because you say you still have ideas for a base. So eventually you'll get around to it, and I cannot wait. Beautiful work there. But I think one of your favorite pieces, which you mentioned to me during the time that I was preparing this, is I asked you, hey, as I always tell my guests, send me 2 or 3 pictures of your favorite works that you've done, so I can use them as promo images. And in this case, he sent me this one, which you guys saw in the promo. So this is one of your favorites, and I can see why. It seems like there's a lot of detail that went involved into the Warbringer here. Can you tell us a little bit more about this? Because I think I followed this while you were working on it. You just finished this recently, didn't you?
That's right. Okay, so the stuff that you see that I do before when it comes to miniature paintings, especially the Android, that's actually a typical, I would say, more Asian style of painting, miniatures painters, because it's more towards the realistic side. If you look at the work from the Western world, like from Italy or European, they actually have a completely different approach when it comes to painting figures. They go with more animated, more illustration style. The color use is a lot more saturated, a lot more wow factor, and they really emphasize the shades and the highlight. It's a completely different approach compared to the realistic approach that the Asian painter would do. So when I started doing hand painting, and I was like, hey, I want to try every different styles, and I want to try the European style on a fantasy figure, and that's why this came along. So on this one, I really try to emphasize on the tone and the shovels and the shading on that. What happened is it's a different mentality, because usually when you do Japanese style, you do it like a Gunpla, where shading and shadow is you assuming what we call the global light onto the build.
Yeah.
So there's no particular direction when it comes to the shading.
Mm-hmm.
With the Western style, they usually would fixate at either 1 or 2 light source and build all the shades and highlights according to the direction of the two light sources.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives you a much more dramatic effect when you look at the sculpture, because it's a lot, the wow factor is there.
Yeah.
Typically you cannot do that to Gunpla. The reason why, because of Gunpla, we're talking about something that's 20 feet, 20 meters tall. So it's impossible to have a single light source that would just illuminate the Gunpla from one side, and then you go completely pitch black on the other side.
Yeah.
Because then you're gonna have the reflection from the floor, from all the buildings, everything. So you will be sort of evenly illuminated to a certain extent when we're talking about something that's 20 meters tall.
Yeah.
But miniature sculptures are human size, so you don't have that problem. I can just say the sun is coming down from the top right-hand corner on an angle, and that's how I'm going to paint it. Every shadows, every highlight is according to that direction of light.
Mm-hmm.
That's a completely different mentality, because you paint it with a direction. So if you look at if you look at the sculpture at a different angle, sometimes it may not work.
Yeah.
The reason why I say that, you would probably know this, people who do a lot of hand painting, they realize most of the acrylic hand painting paint comes in matte, so they are flat in general. The reason why is because, let's say if I have something painted with interaction, shades, and highlight,
Mm-hmm.
and then when you look at it in the room, where the light in the room is coming from a different direction, those light will create an actual real highlight and shade on the build against what you have painted.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you look at it, it's going to look confusing and won't look good.
Yeah.
So that's why a lot of the paint that we use in miniature figure painting are matte, as matte as possible, so it just diffuses those lights, so it doesn't cause a huge highlight or a huge shadow disruption to what you have manually placed on the build.
Okay.
That's something that doesn't happen in Gunpla. So for me, it was, hey, this is brand new and exciting and new for me, and it turns out quite a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, and I can see that. And going into that whole idea, and a really technical idea, once you start getting into the depth of it, is the whole illumination factor, which we actually spoke about yesterday with this kit on screen here on slide 53, which is the War Child. So this one's in grayscale. Right. I remember you telling me. But
right.
You were working here with shadows and illumination also, right?
Right. So this is a practice build for me, because like after I did the War Child, I talked to some expert who are doing miniature figures. Most of the feedback I get from them is I didn't do it exaggerated enough. So the range of the shade and the highlights are not extreme enough. They wanted to see more. Yeah. So one of the things they suggested to me is that you may want to try to practice in grayscale, so that there's no other color that is like distracting you. You just focus on the darkest shadows and the brightest highlight to create a build. And that's how this come along. Now, at the same time, like I told you, I try to put in some Easter egg in most of the stuff that I do.
Yeah.
And you see the little tack on the chest there?
Yeah.
That's a little pink dressed lady.
Yeah, this is from the, what's it called? Schindler's List.
That's right. So I try to put a bit of the reference Easter egg in every build I do.
Mm-hmm. There you go, guys. If you guys haven't seen Schindler's List, I would advise you to. It's one of the classics. I remember having a friend tell me they didn't want to watch it because it was black and white and it just seemed old. But it's a 90s movie, guys. The black and white is part of the style of the movie, which I think is directed by Steven Spielberg, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
So
and it's not just a black and white movie. There's actually color in the movie, and it means something.
Yeah, and it means something. And with the Easter egg that he has here with the girl in the red dress, it's a very powerful scene in the movie that really accentuates the atrocities of war and everything that happens. But yeah. So anyway, illumination, very important. And like you said, this was an exercise to practice that, and I think it came out great. And I think you mentioned that working with grayscale helped you understand it better.
Oh, absolutely. So you actually end up in the realm of drawing and painting when you do a lot of miniature painting.
Yeah.
Not necessarily you have to be an expert at it, but then if you do some research and learn some background on it, it actually helps you paint a lot.
There you go. There you go. So it's important to experiment, guys. That's one of the key points that we've always tried to say here on the show is you want to get to this level, it's about experimenting, and having patience. And just, if you get beat down, you stand back up and do it all over again. But with that, let's move on to this little piece here that you have of your GBWC work, which is just a little bit, not a lot, as to not show a lot. And here you're working with what are basically ornaments for Christmas.
That's right.
To do what? Tell us.
That's how it all started. I ordered those ornaments for my Christmas tree. It came after Christmas, so it's kind of pointless then. So I basically look at it and decide, hey, what can I do with that? And then I came with this idea for my next GBWC is to create, like I said, like when you build towards a competition, you try to do something that's never been done before. So I try to find something in the Gundam rhyme that there is no existing kit that's sitting around. So, and then I ran up to this Toro 800 design. We actually saw that a long time ago. I don't know if most people remember it. There's actually a little red android robot that the main character was piloting at the beginning of the Double Satyr, the animations. It's actually the same model that shows up in Unicorn, but that one was red, this one was orange. Of course, it looks a lot different too. So I was like, okay, so this is almost like a human tank-sized robot that actually has a pilot in it. That would be like a perfect amalgamation of what I've been doing and my Gunpla background, so I can do my miniature stuff and then my Gunpla stuff all together. Unfortunately, because there's no such kit exists, so I kind of have to try to do a lot of scratch building. And unfortunately, I can't show the main robot. It's already done. I just have to finish the diorama, but because it's a competition build, I can't really show too much on it. But I think the second picture shows you the cockpit on the inside. Now, what I'm trying to achieve on this build is that I do not use any single decal. So everything is hand painted, every single detail. Actually, I didn't even use an airbrush on this one so far. So this is something to look forward to. This will be fun. It has already took me, this has been going on for 2 years already. So this is something that's been on the background for a while.
Damn.
That's why you see me doing those figures a lot, because this is going on the background. It's just sometimes you just want something different.
It's a what is it? It's called a clean palette. No, you want a palette cleanser.
The palette cleanser. That's right.
There you go.
And the pilot was challenging.
Oh, and the pilot. Here. So right here on the next slide, we have the comparison. Again, I'm very grateful that you share these, despite it being a GBWC entry. And I know that all of us can't wait to see it, because the fact that you're not using airbrushing, and it's a 2-year project, which will go on a little bit longer. It's a huge difference from when you first started in competition, which was just a 3-month thing, and now you're expanding that into 24 months now, right? And you can definitely see your progress, which I think is the main part of all of this. This is gonna...
So that's the thing. When it comes to GBWC, you're trying to give the best that you have at the time. That this is what I'm about. Like I have this, and I want to try to present all of them in one build. So it obviously it takes time, and it takes a lot of planning, because you try to incorporate a lot of different areas like sculpting, hand painting, and then robot, the mecha design all into one shot. But I would say, because of the competition, that pushed me to try to be a better builder. So a lot of people, hey, I just do it. It's just a hobby. It's a fun thing for me, and I do it whenever I have time. For me, I kind of need some incentives and push for me to get better, and competition is a good thing for me to get that edge, so to speak.
I know this is wow. Can't wait. And speaking of can't wait, every time we do a What's Up Discord, you post some sort of progress on the Zagok. And it's not just me, but it's also my host and the community members that are like, when is this going to get done? Of course, we're not rushing it. It's just that we want to see it, because this all began from a drawing, from an illustration that you saw. You wanted to bring this to life. And this is where we're at, right? Well, okay, sorry. I was going to say this is where we are. right now, but this is where you are right now, because I didn't do any of this.
This is where I'm at right now.
This is where you are right now. This is wonderful work, and I think it's super highly anticipated. How far along are you in this, and how difficult has it been to bring this to life?
Right now, it's not that different than what you see on the picture right
Yeah.
there. So earlier, I talked about when you do scratch build, you have to decide two things. A, whether I want to create my own interpretation of a particular illustration, so it recognizes that illustration, but it's not the same. B, or you try to create that particular illustration. So this exercise is the other way around now. So I'm trying to actually recreate an illustration from a Japanese designer. The problem with doing that, like people would think, oh, okay, it might be easier because it's already there. But the problem with that is because the illustration there's only the front drawing. There's no back, there's no side. What shows up in 2D on paper does not translate into 3D very well. So a lot of the lines that he draw, it's kind of iffy. It doesn't really make sense in real life, and you kind of have to guesstimate what exactly it should be to create that kind of lines and the curve. And then when I started doing it, and then I realized the proportion is actually very different than the original Zog design, because I started off with an HG Zog. So the top part is much more bulkier, with the waist is a lot skinnier, more muscular arms and legs. So I end up buying an additional RG Zog just to fill up those gaps. I can say it's actually technically it's more challenging than doing your own design.
Yeah.
Because when you come with your own design, if you can't find the parts that you wanted, you can always change your design.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
By creating someone else's design, then whether you like it or not, you kind of have to make that shape happen. So I end up doing a lot of sculpting on this and a lot of power plate sculpting, which is something that I'm not too used to. Because when you do melting, well, let's put it this way: when we do modifications, basically what we're doing is trying to create volume. There's two ways to create volume. Either you do power plate to actually box it up, so we call it boxing. So you put in all the sides and then going together to create a box. So that's boxing. The other one, it's more like I don't know if there's a term for it, but if you remember when you're a kid, we probably all seen it. Remember those the wood skeleton dinosaurs?
Yeah.
That you have them, that you have a 2D pieces, snap it off, and then you cross them together, and somehow it create a 3D image of a dinosaur. It's a lot like that. So basically, you use the power plate to create your parameters, and then you cross them into a 3D shape, and then you fill it up with putty to create the actual dimension, the actual curve you want. Because this design, there's a lot of curve to it. So a lot of them is not, when it comes to curve, it's not exact science. So it's very difficult to actually capture a curve accurately. So in order to do that, a lot of times you would draw it on the styrene first in 2D to get the perfect shape. And then you cross it to become the 3D reference. And then once you put putty and to fill up the volume, when you start to buff it down, when you actually see the styrene, the side of the styrene showing, that's your boundary, so that you know you're at the right point, so that you can have a 3D shape, that exact same curve that you want. That's a process that I don't do it very often because it's painful and it takes a lot of effort to do it. But I have to do that in this build because I'm restricted by the design there is. It's a good learning experience for me, and I look forward to finish this too. But the only problem is I still don't know how I should paint this, because now I'm trying to create the exact same design from the illustrator. Should I go about and do my own paint scheme, or should I actually stick to the original and do the dark color scheme? I'm still debating on that.
Well, I can't wait until you figure it out, man, because I am anxious. I want to see it done. And again, it seems like every time you work on something, you bring a lot of technical knowledge and research onto it, which into your project, which is something that you mentioned all the way in the beginning of the interview. And I applaud you for that. Honestly, it kind of goes to show that there is a lot to learn in this hobby still, and you never really can master it. You're always learning.
I don't think there's a. I don't think it's possible to master it. Like, it's you're constantly learning new stuff. Like, I've stopped building for 20 some odd years and then come back to the scene and I find out people are doing things completely different than what I used to do. Like there are new tools available, so you do things differently. There are new options available. Like even the putty you use to do sim lines, like the approach to sim lines is completely different now than before. So I say that's the reason why we love this hobby, right? Because
Yeah.
there's always something new for us to learn. So keep working on it and keep learning and having fun.
Yep. And I think that's very important. Thank you so much, Simon. Well, guys, I hope that you guys enjoyed that. Simon, is there anything that you would like to say to the people that watch you or follow you? Anything that comes from a builder standpoint?
Not much. Like I've been graceful because there's a lot of people following me on Facebook, Twitter, and IG so far. Because what happens, I'm a slow builder, so I don't really have a lot of updates. So I thank all those people for following my work, and
Yeah.
I'll try my best and keep going.
All right, there you go, guys. So go over and check out Simon on his handles, which are, Chessy Monkey on IG and also Twitter, and you can also find him on Facebook. Simon, seriously, man, thank you so much for showing up today. It's been fun.
No, thank you for inviting me.
It's been fun. Guys, remember that today's show... Oh, don't worry about it. Today's show was sponsored by USA Gundam Store. Remember to use Talk 10 on your next purchase with them to save 10%. The music you're listening to is copyright free, and you can find that music on Spotify on Stream Beats official page. But with that said, tomorrow there is no grade sessions. Some little things came up because there's an IPMS thing in the US tomorrow. So tomorrow there will be no NGS, and we'll pick that up in the next one with Ryan Lau, Joshua Dara, and David Chocofalcon and me. We're going to be doing some things together on stream. That's in 2 weeks from now. And with that said, go over and check out the new High Grade Sidebuster review that is up on YouTube by Sean. So with that said, guys, we'll talk later. And Simon, thank you again so much. Talk to you guys on the next one.
My pleasure.
See ya.
All right.